To all appearances, 2014 was a great year to be an expatriate manager in China. 25 years after the country started re-engaging with the capitalist world, people had the cash and appetite for all things foreign. Wristwatches, bicycles, and television sets were the trinity of middle-class aspirations no more. Chinese people wanted Rolexes, BMWs, and multiplex cinemas featuring Hollywood blockbusters. The omnipotent Communist Party's curious new leader, Xi Jinping, unhesitatingly tackled the chief concern of foreign investors, corruption. Not only did shady demands from government officials drop dramatically almost overnight, it seemed to happen without the expected economic slowdown of anti-corruption clampdowns. Doubling down on the previous administration's development spree, the new leadership made sure that airports and railway stations, factories and wind turbines, Apple stores and luxury malls kept sprouting from the ground. President Xi toured the world, and few doubted he was after foreign investment, know-how and guidance. Before the end of the year, Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott would praise visiting Xi Jinping for his commitment to full democracy in China by 2050. The free trade agreements that President Xi churned out around the globe meant new opportunities for the China branches of multinational corporations that employed most foreigners. Some polls had recently named China as the most desirable expat destination in the world, mainly for the money to be made there. Jobs like mine in China exist because investors abroad are concerned about working in an environment with communication and cultural differences. The BBC quoted a Fortune 500 firm's foreign executive. My role is to mitigate those fears and make people feel good about their investments. But there was more, the article continued. As Chinese firms explored global opportunities, they would need foreign talent to replicate the success stories of China-bound multinational investment in reverse. With China's outward investment growing tenfold over a decade, a steady source of expatriate jobs at local firms looked secure. It was in this upbeat atmosphere that the European Chamber of Commerce in China, a prestigious lobbying institution, declared in one of its annual publications, the golden age for business in China is drawing to a close. The paper in question, the European Business in China position paper, was far from mainstream media. Its few thousand print copies and several times as many digital downloads were limited to China watchers with an appetite for data and the attention spent to digest it. But the position paper was a trusted source among China's expat executives and experts communities, bureaucrats in Brussels, and China-facing business people worldwide. Moreover, EU chambers all over Asia were hives of networking activity, and the message was sufficiently dramatic to spawn a self-replicating meme. Is the golden age over for multinationals in China? Hong Kong's South China Morning Post asked days after the position paper's launch. The question soon echoed through hotel auditoriums, conference rooms and investment banks, consultancies and law firms, from Shanghai to Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Beijing and beyond. It soon scrolled onto global screens through a wide range of worldwide publications, including predictable ones like Industry Week and more unlikely ones like the Christian Science Monitor. So this is where I would like to stop first. It answers the question of what about this golden age? And maybe the interesting thing is that whenever I'm talking about the golden age of foreign business in China, I always try to remind everybody that what is good for foreign business in China doesn't necessarily equal what is good for China. So especially now when Chinese authorities are, shrinking the playing field for certain international companies while trying to attract other kind of international companies to the country, there is a lot of pessimism around, and there is a lot of perception that China is becoming a harder place for foreign business in general. So in this respect, I think what has changed, apart from things changing in other countries as well, is the Chinese government's priorities when it comes to attracting international business to the country. But it has always been the case that international executives in China had to very, very closely watch things like the 5-year plan and things like the Belt and Road Initiative in order to make their business successful in China. That was always a prerequisite of being a successful executive in China. However, one of the added problems recently is that it was very difficult to access China. And those executives who stayed in China all through the last couple of years, they had limited possibilities to travel between China and the rest of the world. So basically, the information that international executives are relying on is very often just 3 or 4 years old. And that is something that I hope that the book will remedy a little bit.
I think most points that catch my mind, it's what's good for international business doesn't mean that it's good for Chinese. So leader, they have to compromise how they can work around these two constraints in order to succeed in your business for mutual benefit for Chinese and for international or for you personally.
Well, you have to look at it in a very pragmatic way. So, in my previous life, I used to be a junior diplomat. And that is a completely different world because diplomats work on very strong principles. Business people really don't. For every business, there is a bottom line that they would like to reach. That could be market share, that could be sales volume, that could be a profit margin, and so on. And business people look at each other very pragmatically. So if you look at expat careers, expats settled in China or went to China for some very specific reasons, which mostly had to do with business, either in the personal sense, they wanted to build a certain kind of career, or in a broader sense, because they wanted to achieve some kind of corporate goal for their companies. And China also looked at international business in a very, very pragmatic way. So for example, in the book, I spent quite a few pages on why China built up this system of special economic zones and special development zones, which are basically islands of hosting international businesses under much more favorable circumstances than in the country in general. And in this respect, when anything changes in this social contract between China and foreign businesses, you cannot just simply looking at it. If I am in a certain business, let's say I am running a law firm or a pharmaceutical business, if these changes, let's say new regulations, make my life personally more difficult, it is too early to cry foul and saying China is making it harder for international business in China, because usually what happens is new regulation makes it harder for certain industries and makes it easier for certain other industries. The next question to really ask is that intentional? For example, China very intentionally tries to make it more difficult for international businesses that pollute the environment or that use Chinese labor in a certain way, which is not in line with how China would like to see labor relations develop in the country. And then it's extremely intentional. But they also want to develop industries which use certain technologies, bring certain technologies to the country that China needs, or which makes, for example, income distribution in the country more equitable. And sometimes it's very intentional. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it happens that simply some kind of regulations, they have some unwanted side effect for both sides, both China and international businesses. For example, in a podcast very recently, they asked me about a regulation of taxing benefits for expat managers. So making things like your rent for a house, international education for kids, all kinds of monetary and non-monetary benefits part of your tax base for international executives. And this legislation has been passed quite a few years ago. And it's still kind of hanging over the head of international companies like a Damocles sword. And the Chinese government realized it, so they passed but never enforced this regulation. So we have to look at it this way. It's a fairly complex picture. Sometimes it's good for us, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's intentionally good for us, sometimes not. And then we have to deal with it like any other business risk. This is why it's business. I hear somebody opened your mic. Is it John?
Yes, that's me, John. Yeah, congrats on the book. Looking forward to reading it, Gabor. Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
want to hear your, your point of view. Let's look at the future. Let's say next 5 years. You've been in China 20 years or so. You're a China expert. Are you still excited, positive about the, let's say, the next 5 years, working with expats or for foreigners in China? Or do you feel, if you can be honest with us, if you have any feeling, you feel negative or like, oh, it's gonna be less interesting for young people or professionals like you to be based in China? Just want to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a great question, and I would like to go back to something that we said earlier about it really depends on what your personal and business objective is. So I generally don't like signing up to looking at it in either a generally pessimistic or a generally optimistic way, because it is simply going to be a different number of expats going to China for a different number of reasons, and obviously seeing their objectives met or not met in a different way. So let me tell you how China can disappoint you in the next 5 years. If you and this is not just my opinion, but also if you looked at different kinds of surveys, like the one that HSBC runs, the Expat Explorer survey, or Internations, they also publish annual surveys about why foreigners go to China. If you went to China or if you had wanted to go to China in the next couple of decades for its spectacular double-digit growth, then China is going to disappoint you now, because that growth is simply not there anymore. So if you are in sales, if you want to grow a business and gain a high turnover, then obviously an economy growing 10, 12, or even 9% a year, it means that if you show up to work and you do the bare minimum, you are going to create that growth. And this is simply not true in China anymore. Also, if you went to China before, because that was the simple, most important center to do international business in the world, which it was for a while, it is going to disappoint you now, because China's priorities are not to grow and integrate this kind of international supply chain anymore. They wanted to consolidate, and they want to make the supply chain more predictable for social and political purposes. And finally, to be very honest with you, if you wanted to go to China for its vibrant expat community, you wanted to party with fellow expats, you wanted to, I don't know, go out with lots of expats, eat Western food, you wanted your doctor to be a foreigner, you wanted the teachers of your kids to be a foreigner, that is going to be a harder proposition in China from now on. However, if, like many other foreigners did, want to go to China in order to learn more about China, it can be its ancient culture, it can be its modern trends, it can be the language, for example, then China is a great place to be. And specifically, if you want to learn good Mandarin, less foreigners is a good thing. I mean, this is why I went to Shaoxing for my first year, because I simply didn't want to live every day of every month of my life in a foreign language. If you want to learn about rapidly developing next generation technologies that China is going to bring to the world, China not just is, but is going to be the place to be. So if you want to learn about mobile payments, if you want to learn about the technology that goes into self-driving cars, if you want to learn about absolutely futuristic applications of artificial intelligence, again, China is going to be the place to be. They say that it is going to be a less family-friendly place, obviously for certain restrictions on the education sector, for example, and also because expat families with kids like to hang out with other expat families with kids. So they say it is going to be an easier place to fit in for either early career young single people or post-career people, let's say, who are roughly my age group. I'm 52 now. You got to a certain point in your career, your kids are in college or even grown-up professionals, and now you want to do something exciting. Again, China could be the place to be. Actually, a lot of international managers who contact me about how to get into China, into an expat job, are actually people who worked in China as expat at a certain point in the past. So let's say they were there 10 years ago, 12 years ago. They are aware that it's a completely different place, and they would like to go back. And I think I could encourage multinational employers to work with those people because they already have their first lessons about China. So, and also young people who learn Mandarin outside of China. And some of them do. I mean, some young people speak spectacular Mandarin. So it depends on which demographic you belong to. And then when I know that, then I can tell you whether it's an optimistic or a pessimistic picture. But I like saying when I coach people that all appointments come with disappointments. So no international job is going to make all your dreams come true. Maybe after China, they sent you to, I don't know, a country in Southeast Asia where there are wonderful beaches and there is great work-life balance, but you don't make the same amount of money and it's not so visible as a career in China, and the other way around. And this is why I work with these professionals, because if I know your personal and corporate goals, then I can tell better if China can deliver.